Welcome to Belgrade Online. We're glad you decided to join us today. I'm Chantill, and I'll be your host today. Here at Belgrade, we hope to encourage you in your journey and explore what that means in new and beautiful ways. Sit back, relax, and enjoy this week's episode. Up next, announcements. Then we will see who's having birthdays and anniversaries this week. After that, we will hear from the pastor, the scriptures, and let the Spirit move you with some music before I come back to see you off. Welcome to Belgrade Online.
Picture it, Ma.
That's right. We want you to picture Ma. Or rather, we want you to send us pictures of your mother or some mother figure in your life for an upcoming montage honoring the mothers in our lives. Please email photos to baumc@baumc.org or contact the church office if you want to submit a photo that's not digital. With your help, we look forward to honoring Ma in an upcoming Belgrade Online. Please have submissions in by Friday, May 6th.
The outreach team is collecting new socks and undergarments for adults and children beginning May 1st through May 22nd to be donated to Partners for Affordable Housing. One of the things most requested by families served by Partners for Affordable Housing is underwear. This is an annual event for the outreach team, and we call it Undie Sunday. Items can be dropped by the office during the week between 9 and noon or on Sunday mornings in the lobby. Please call the church ahead of time if you're stopping by during the week to confirm someone is there. We certainly appreciate all your support in the past for this event, and we look forward to a successful Undie Sunday for 2022.
This week's birthdays and anniversaries. Happy birthday on the 3rd,
Kevin Black.
Happy birthday on the 5th,
Arnie Wells.
Happy birthday on the 6th,
Janet Mickelson.
Happy birthday on the 6th,
Jeff Rigdon.
Happy birthday on the 7th,
Miriam Feist.
happy anniversary on the 5th,
Doug and Shelley Descher.
happy anniversary on the 5th,
Scott and Dawn Kruger.
happy anniversary on the 6th,
Kent and Wendy Calm.
happy anniversary on the 6th.
Dennis and Cheryl Price.
Have a great week.
Well, we're in, last week we started a new series, so we're in a new series this week. It's called Lessons from the Golden Girls, because I am an unashamed 80s fanatic, and I am not ashamed that I love the Golden Girls. So, don't judge me. I love them. Anyway, so this is kind of a fun way of looking at some kingdom principles that are found in the show, The Golden Girls, you know? And you might be saying, isn't that kind of not a very Christian show? Yeah, it's not. But that's the cool thing about God and the kingdom of God, is that the kingdom is always found in unlikely places, through unlikely people. Unexpected, surprising. In the scriptures, Jesus was himself an unlikely package, an unlikely container of all of the divinity of God, you know, all of the character and godness, you know, squeezed into one person. They were looking for something completely different than what they actually got. God himself, God's own essence is very different than how we've pictured this divine being. And not only that, but even in the scriptures, the kingdom of God that the people were expecting is not the way that the kingdom was actually brought to them through Jesus. And the people that perpetuated that kingdom were very different, were unexpected people. It's usually not the elite folks, it's everyday people with real problems and messy lives. And, you know, it's those of us who are real and have real grit to our lives and have real stains on our past and who our character isn't perfect and we're not, you know, the ideal picture of what you would think holiness would be. But that is the beauty of Jesus in the kingdom. It's through unexpected people and unexpected places. So, what we're going to do in this series is we're basically just going to go through every single main character in that show. And if you're not familiar with the show, you must not have lived through the 80s or early 90s, but I'm joking. But if you haven't seen the show, it's about these four women in their golden years that find themselves, whether through the husbands have passed away or through divorce or something, they find themselves, all renting this house together in Miami, and they're completely different, and they get along mostly. They fight, they argue, they talk about life, usually at their kitchen table over cheesecake. And we talked about that a bit last week. And through this relationship of mutual respect and trust and love and irritation and arguing and just being what a normal family and friendship is, they get through life together, and their lives are enriched and quite meaningful together. So you've got the owner of the house, who is kind of like this Southern belle, her name's kind of self-centered Southern belle, Blanche, and then you've got this lady named Rose, who is from this fictional town, St. Olaf, Minnesota, and we're going to talk about her next week. And then you've got Dorothy, who's kind of this cantankerous school teacher, and then you've got Dorothy's mother, who's this spicy little old Italian lady who was at a nursing home, but mysteriously not a nursing home, but an old folks home, but the home mysteriously burnt down, and it's never actually told why or how, and you always suspect that Sophia's probably the one that did it. But she ends up living with this in this little house as well. And so we're going through each one of those characters through the next few weeks. And today we're going to talk about little old Sophia. She's my favorite character of all the four. And so that's who we're going to talk about this morning. And I love Sophia because, if you want to talk about big wisdom coming in unexpected packages, this is the one. And she's this little old lady from Italy, who grew up. She's from Sicily, but migrated with her young husband and her little babies to New York, lived in New York, and then ended up in Miami, in her later years. And kind of reminds me of my grandmother, who my grandmother was kind of a short little Dutch lady, kind of one of these ladies where, didn't have a whole lot of power, wasn't very strong. You could kick them down the stairs, but when they spoke, you listened. You know what I mean? Because you knew from a young age that there's just so much life there. There's so much wisdom there. There's so much stories and experiences there. And whenever they open their mouth to talk about it, you're kind of instantly into it. So this morning we're going to look at Sophia, but we're going to look at one specific aspect of Sophia. And so we put together a few clips together that's a few minutes long here that kind of illustrate kind of the angle we're going to take. So let's go ahead and roll that video, and then we'll talk afterwards.
Picture it. Sicily, 1914.
Rose never mentioned Sicily.
Picture it. Sicily, 1922. A young military officer stationed far from home. He wanders the streets seeking a friendly face and a glass of Chianti. Finally, he happens into a dusty little cafe where he finds both. The man laughs for the first time in months and finds inspiration in a beautiful peasant girl, wise beyond her years. Well, the cafe is closed. She takes him home with her. 3 glorious days, he returns to his command, prepared to lead his people through whatever battles need to be fought. Dorothy, that young peasant girl, was me. And that young man was Winston Churchill. Picture it. Sicily, 1912. A beautiful young peasant girl with clear olive skin meets an exciting but penniless Spanish artist. There's an instant attraction. They laugh, they sing, they slam down a few Boilermakers. But I digress. He paints her portrait. She sees the portrait and is insulted. It looks nothing like her, and she storms out of his life forever. That peasant girl was me. And that painter, was Pablo Picasso.
Ma, I have a feeling you're lying.
Be positive.
Okay, I'm positive you're lying.
Picture this. Sicily, 1912. Two young girls, best friends, who shared three things: a pizza recipe, some dough, and a dream. Everything is going great until one day, a fast-talking pepperoni salesman gallops into town. Of course, both girls are impressed. He dates one night, the other the next night. Pretty soon, he drives a wedge between them. Before you know it, the pizza suffers, the business suffers, the friendship suffers. The girls part company and head for America, never to see one another again. Rose, one of those girls was me. The other one you probably know as Mama Celeste.
Sophia, what's the point?
The point is, I lost a fortune. Picture it, Sicily, 1852.
Ma, I am in no mood, and besides, you weren't alive in 1852.
What? We can't learn from history?
Ma, I am in here because of guilt. This is not a story about guilt.
This is a story about being a bad hostess. Picture it. Sicily, 1900. An olive-skinned woman set sail for the New World.
I was talking about her medical history.
So was I. You think that was a pleasure cruise? There was smallpox, scurvy, typhoid, and that was business class.
Rosa, impedisci il lavoro con I tuoi problemi, capisci?
Vincenzo says he thinks he has a solution to your problem.
Really? Well, translate for me, Sophia.
Picture it. Sicily, 1939. The war is on. A promising young architect is offered a job to spearhead construction of a new wing at the Vatican.
Wait a minute, Ma. You say your Italian is rusty, but you know the word for spearhead?
It was my brother's nickname for a while as a child. Anyway, the young man is torn. Taking the train to Rome means running the risk of enemy bombs. But staying home means passing up a chance to make history.
Boy, he certainly packs a lot of meaning into a few words.
Ah, shut up. In the end, he chooses safety. It's a decision he still regrets half a century later. His conclusion: life without risk is no life at all. Picture it. Sardinia, 1932.
I thought these stories of yours always took place in Sicily.
Can a person go away for the weekend? Picture it. Sicily, 1922.
Sophia, I have a problem. I just saw the guy I've been dating out with another woman. Now, what do you think I ought to do?
I think you should sit down and picture Sicily, 1922. It was the worst of times.
Oh, Ma, I have a problem.
Just sit down and listen. First of all, is everyone who lives in this house here at this very moment?
Yes.
Then for the last time, picture it. Sicily, 1922. Is this helping anyone yet? Because this sure feels like an ending to me.
So that's Sophia. Sophia is like she's the storyteller, you know. So usually what happens in the show is somebody has this problem, and they're going through this. It's not just a problem; it's like a conundrum, and they're trying to figure it out. And they sit down somewhere, and you know, and Sophia happens to be there, and they're saying, "Oh, I'm going through this," and so Sophia's leading in and trying to help, and so she tries to give him this bit of advice, and she always starts by saying, "Picture it, picture it," and then she goes into this long story, and in this story, they're all kind of leaning in, and she's got them engaged. They're like eating out of the palm of her hand with this story, you know. And then usually there's some sort of a letdown where they're like, "What? Whatever. That's not true. I don't get it. That's not for real, you know." And but then she'll lean back, and after she kind of lets them down, then she'll smack them with the real truth. And it's usually something extremely practical and extremely in your face and right now and confrontational. And it's some kind of a hard truth. And I didn't put that part in the ends of the clips, because usually at the end of the story, they'll say, "Okay, that kind of made sense," you know. And I love that because Sophia, in certain ways, kind of is a lot like Jesus. And you're like, okay, what? That's kind of a stretch, don't you think? Well, not really, because remember, like I said, the kingdom of God comes through unexpected people in unexpected places. And Sophia's whole role in this story, in this show, is telling stories. You know, Jesus, the primary way that he taught in Scripture was through these things called parables. And so if we put our Scripture up on the screen, we're going to read a couple Scriptures today, but this first one is kind of the one that's the centerpiece of, this Scripture is the centerpiece of the message. It's very short, it's only 2 verses. But this is from Matthew 13, verse 34 and 35. And it says this, it says, Jesus told the crowds all of these things are his teachings, he told the crowds all of these things in parables or stories. Without a parable or a story, he told them nothing. This was to fulfill what had been spoken through the prophet, I'll open my mouth to speak in parables or stories, and I'll proclaim what has been hidden from the foundation of the world. And so, parables and stories, this is the Son of God, the revelation, the person who is revealed God himself, that God is revealed through, the way that this manifestation of God, this billboard for God, communicates, the way that this person communicates is through stories, is through parables. And through these stories and through these parables, Jesus captivated so many people. And usually the stories were very unconventional. Because a lot of the stories that Jesus tells, just like Sophia, because Sophia, at some point in the story, the people listening will realize this story isn't real. She's making stuff up. But see, Jesus' parables, a lot of them aren't necessarily, they're not nonfiction. A lot of the stories that Jesus tells were already in the culture at that time. But it's the way that Jesus tells them that made them shocking to the early hearers. Because, every story's got a punchline, right? And so at the end of every story, wherever the punchline was, Jesus would retell the story, but he would change the punchline. And the way he would change the punchline would be really shocking to the hearers. And so everybody that heard that punchline that was opposite of what they were used to, it kind of slapped them upside the head. And it was usually some sort of a hard truth that they needed to hear. And so this is the primary method of how Jesus talked. And this is, I like it because this is how Sophia uses these stories. It seems like it's this off-the-wall story, but in the end, it actually is supremely helpful. And so let's talk about this a little bit. I want to talk about stories a little bit. And then after that, we're going to take communion together. So, why does these stories connect? What is it about stories that really anchor our hearts and kind of captivate our minds, Because we all love stories. I think I've told the story here before that I remember when I was a kid, I like many of us, my mom read to me every night and read stories, and my favorite story was Cinderella when I was really little. It was the little golden book version of Cinderella. I still have it. And I had that thing memorized. I knew where the page breaks were. I knew where to pause and take a breath. I knew how to, I could mimic exactly how my mom would read it, and because she didn't just read it, she would story that thing to me, and so I remember one time my brother, I'm the youngest of 4, and my older siblings, there's 15 years between me and my next sibling. And so my middle brother, who is 19 years older than me, he comes home from college when I was barely, I couldn't read. I was like 2 or 3 or something. And I was reading this story, and I was like page breaking at the right times and everything. And my brother was like, he's reading, Mom, he's reading, look at this. And she's like, he's not reading. She's like, he's reading, and he knows where the page breaks are and everything. And my mom's like, the book is upside down. The book upside down. But I knew where all the page breaks. And so, I love stories, but we're all that way when it comes to stories. How many of us have you sat through a very, very long sermon, never one that I've given, of course, and been completely tuned out, and all of a sudden they start telling a story, and you're like, you're into it all of a sudden, right? Because we're stories, and that works because our lives are stories. There's a story around every one of us. We're not just, walking beings floating through time and space. We all have a story. And whether you like it or not, there's a story around everything about you. There's a story around, your birth. Every one of us has a story of how we were born and how that came across and what happened that night. And, we grow up and there's a story around our childhood somewhere. We can talk about the stories around some of our deepest wounds. Our career path in life, why we chose the things we did or what we chose to do with our time in adulthood. There's a story around that. There's a story around our faith, what faith we may or may not hold. We have reasons for that, and we can tell a story of why we feel the way we feel about things. And, there's a story about maybe our marriage or our marriages or what kind of is happening in that area of our lives. There's a series of events, there's stories. There's even, whether we like it or not, there will be a story around every one of our deaths to be told. And there's also a story around our bodies, our physical bodies, why they look the way we look, why we carry ourselves the way we carry ourselves, maybe an ailment we have or some weird quirk that you can do, like I can clap with one hand. My kids loved that when I was little. You know what I mean? What's with that? That's weird, How do you do that? Tell me the story. There's a story around it. And so the reason why stories connect with us is because stories give us structure to our lives. If you're in the midst of your story, it's tough to see kind of where you're at. You're walking through a forest, it's really difficult to know where you are without proper instruments. But if you have somebody up above looking down at the forest and the landscape and sees everything, they can tell you exactly where you are. And stories are kind of like that navigational system. They give the seemingly random events in our lives, they give them structure. And in essence, they give us the one thing that we all crave in life, and that is meaning. Stories give our lives meaning. They can help us to understand ourselves and understand our journeys, where we're at. And stories, that's why we're captivated with them, But sometimes in our own lives, because not only does every event in our physical attributes and everything have a story behind them or contain a story of some type, we also tell ourselves stories without thinking about it. We also have stories that we tell ourselves. We have narratives around why we are the way we are. No, I can't do this because of that. Or I feel this way because of this. Or I tend to do this, or I tend to get into this because of that. We have these stories around ourselves. I have a fear of this because of that. Or, maybe it's some roadblocks in our lives. Maybe it's hang-ups that we have. And through counseling and talking and friendship and getting things out, we find out that the roadblocks in our lives are just things that we've accepted about ourselves, stories that we've told us about ourselves. That if we were to break outside of that and learn a new story, a new system of meaning, it can help us get out of a downward spiral, out of a negative cycle, and find ourselves into a new positive way of living. So sometimes the stories that we tell ourselves actually keep us in a difficult place in our lives. And so I think about it this way. I love personality profiles, It's really important to me to be able to understand myself and understand ourselves and figure out why we are the way we are and to kind of get our story straight, so to speak. And personality profiles are great because if they're done correctly, because they can help you gain a deeper understanding of yourself. But here's the problem with them. Sometimes when you learn, I'm this, I am this personality type, or I'm this specific personality profile, or whatever, we tend to think that we only exist there, and we put ourselves in a box, and we say, I wish I could do that over there, but I just can't because I'm this personality or whatever, and it tends to shackle us instead of free us. It tends to put us into boundaries that we were never meant to be in, instead of using them to help break us out of boundaries, And so, like personality profiles, sometimes the stories that we tell ourselves, ways that we understand our life and our trajectory, and ways that we come to understand ourselves, sometimes those box us in and they keep us orbiting around something that isn't helpful, an idea that isn't helpful, or some truth that we've accepted about ourselves that isn't helpful. I'm just not good at this, or I'm not smart enough for that, or I've got this mental disorder so I can't do that, or you know what I mean? It can keep you shackled instead of helping you to break out of those bits of orbit. And so in the scriptures, we have Jesus coming to the people of God who've accepted these stories about themselves. They've accepted that they're the specific people in a specific place. They're the people of God. They need to have, political authority, but they don't have it. And there's the empire that has the boot of the empire is on their neck, and they're held down, and they're politically oppressed, and all this kind of stuff. And so they've accepted this, and through their scriptures, they've accepted this narrative that there's going to come this political Messiah that's going to come. It's going to lead a revolt, and they're going to just start this war and completely obliterate the empire, and God will restore Israel to this new preeminent power in the world, like they were in the Old Testament under King David. That was the hope. And that was the story they told themselves. So when Jesus comes onto the scene, that's what they're expecting. But that's not what they got. The actual story that God was playing out was completely different than where they were living. And so Jesus comes and starts telling these stories. And these stories seem pretty cryptic. And these stories have this shocking ending, kind of smacked them upside the head a little bit. And they're like, wait a minute, what? We're the people of God, and now you're telling us that we're the ones that are on the outside? And our enemies are the ones that are on the inside? We don't like that. We don't like that, God. We don't like you messing with our worldview. We don't like you messing with our stories. But if there's anything that God is good at, it's messing with the shackles that we put on ourselves, that we feel are comforting to us. And so it's much like Sophia when she comes in and she sits down, and somebody's always got a major life problem. And then she sits down and she says, okay, let me help you out with this. Picture it. And she engages their imagination. Because remember, we talked about this a couple series ago, that no positive transformation or change in our life comes without the aid of our imagination. You got to be able to imagine a better future, and that's what fuels our transformation, is our imagination. But see, Sophia she would sit down and she'd say, picture it, and she knew how to take this hard wisdom that she'd learned from her life and package these stories in such a way that it took them on their journey, right where they were on their journey, and it took them out of their defunct story and kind of shocked them into a new one. And so, she'd say, I left one of the endings in there where she's translating for this Italian guy, and she's saying, picture it, da, da, da. And the story was one of the other ladies had this issue that they were dealing with, and they didn't know what to do, and basically wrestling with their own story. And Sophia sees this as an opportunity to tell a parable, or to tell a story, because it wasn't a true story; it's a parable. And so she's packaging this, but it doesn't mean it wasn't true. Something doesn't need to be nonfiction to be true. And so she's packaging this story, this parable, and she's going into it. And at the end, Dorothy's like, you're packing a lot of words in there. He only said a few words in Italian, and you're going on for a couple paragraphs here. She's like, shut up. But at the end of it, she's like, a life without risk is no life at all. And in that moment, at the end, if I were to let that clip play a little bit longer, you would see that the one who was having the issue said, I know exactly what to do. And she runs out. And it sets her on a completely different path. It fixed her story. And so that's what Jesus' parables did. Jesus knew that's very difficult to see the structure of your story, like the actual story you're living. not the story you perceive that you're living. But he knew it's difficult to see the actual story you're living when you're down in it, when everything just feels like chaos, when it feels like things are just being thrown at you and things are just happening and you're stumbling over yourself and nothing is going right, or maybe everything's going right and then something comes in and blindsides it and puts it all under the tires. Here's the thing. When it comes to our lives, this is what stories correct, but we get off track. Our stories get off track because we can have a positive goal. We could be heading towards something good, right? We could have the best intentions in the world. We're living a good story. We're going to be spending our time, our resources, and everything that we have for the better. We can have all the best intentions in the world, be striving towards a great goal, like I said, attempting to live a very good story, but completely veer off course. And this is something that I feel like God and the Spirit has been teaching me lately in my own life. Because I've got a mental disorder toward this thing that I'm heavily medicated for. Is you can put all the time in the world into your own story, but it won't necessarily give you success in that story. Because there's one thing that if you spend all this time on the right things at the right times, if you spend all this time but it doesn't have one thing, it doesn't matter. It can completely veer you off course. And I found this actually as I was reading this book a while back, and I'm going to read it to you out of this. It's a book called The Power of Story. And I don't know who the author is, Jim Layer or something, but it's this book. It's actually a business book. But I don't like reading about this business. Somebody gave it to me and I read the introduction and I've never gotten past the intro. So it's one of those stories. It's not a story, but one of those books. But here's the thing. Here's what this is about. It says this. It says, we have a flawed belief that simply investing time in the things we care about will generate a positive return. The belief and the story that flows from it, that belief and that story are simply not true. Time doesn't equal success. We can spend time with our families. We can be present at dinner time. We can have lunches with our significant others and our direct reports in our jobs or our coworkers, and we can remember to call home when we're traveling or put in 45 minutes on the treadmill 5 days a week, and we can do all of this thing. But if we're too exhausted and too distracted and too frustrated and angry when we're doing these things, then the positive return we've hoped for will never come. Without investing high-quality, focused energy in the activity before you, whatever it may be, setting time aside just takes us from being absent to being absently present. It's a condition that's plaguing Americans in our culture right now. This book is about 15 years old, by the way. Is a worker that's too fatigued or a family member that's too mentally not there really better than no worker or no family member at all? How about a parent or a spouse? Time has value only when it's intersected with energy. Therefore, it becomes priceless in its intersection with extraordinary energy, and this is something that I call engagement. Let me paraphrase all that for you. Basically, if you're putting all the time in the world in your story into the right things, but you don't have engagement during that time, the success won't come. Stories do their best work when we're engaged in the moment. And in our lives right now, our entire culture is built on distracting us. We have one major distraction that's in our pockets every single day that has hundreds of thousands of distractions on it. That the phone in our pockets. And why, that's taking a little extreme, don't you think? The world isn't bent on distracting us. Oh, yes, it is. Do you want to know why? Because the people in charge are the people with money. And how do they get more money and keep that money? By producing products. And how do their products get money? By you buying them. And by keeping to buy them. And how do we keep buying them? By distracting us every single day with them. We've got commercials being flown at us every day. You can't even pop open something like if or some pump was malfunctioning the other night. I popped up a video to see if I could figure out what was wrong. I had to wade through about 2 minutes of commercials on a YouTube video to try until I got to this video that some dude took in his basement 5 years ago. There's advertisements trying to get your attention constantly. When you're driving down the road, there's billboards everywhere. You want to talk about church culture, you've got church putting signs trying to get you to come to church. We've got different churches. I'm from the cities. You can't drive 3 blocks without some sort of a garage sale sign or a church sign or, something to get your attention. You walk into a store, everything in a store is designed to get your attention. Basically, the products that companies sell and market to us and market to our kids are marketing in and of themselves. Because you can't just buy one figure, you got to buy the whole set, right? But they package them individually, and you got to keep buying them. And then they'll come out with the same thing, a couple years later, where they look a little bit different. Well, now you got to get that one too. So it's this constant thing, and everything is built on distracting you to keep you pumping money into the machine. And we fall for it. And as a result, we don't engage. We don't put our energy where it matters. You want to know why kids today have so much anxiety? You want to know why the suicide rates are through the roof? You want to know why families are broken and people are having hard times at school and everything seems to be going awry? Those are all in the areas of connection. They're breaches in how we connect with one another. In essence, we give time, but we're not engaged. I'm horrible at this. When we give time, but we don't engage, there's nothing there. It's just running on a treadmill. And our feelings of frustration and anger and detachment continue to grow and snowball and snowball and snowball. I've read, I can't give you the exact statistic, and I'm not going to generalize a statistic because I don't want to give the wrong one, but basically I've seen studies that show that basically the amount of information that a young person takes in on a daily basis in this day and age is the same amount of distractedness that basically somebody in a psych ward in the 50s took in every day. Same mental disposition. Our culture is riddled with disengagement. Time? Yeah, we don't always give time in the right places. But you can get a lot done in a little amount of time when you're engaged. I have ADD, I know this. Hyperfocus is a thing. I can get a whole week's worth done in about 3 hours if you give me the right things, you know what I mean? Or don't give me the right things. You have engagement, you can get so much, you have powerful conversations, you can get real deep real quick. Engagement is the thing. And see, engagement is where stories and parables do their best work. Because they pull you in. Like I said, you can be completely out here somewhere, but then somebody tells a story and you're locked in. Because story engage us, and they awaken us to something new and fresh. They crack us out of our stories and awaken to the fact that there's a better one over here I could be living if I just make this tweak and just step right into it. They help our perspective. They help engage us. See, when Jesus spoke, he did this. When Sophia speaks, she did this. It's a lesson we can learn. And they do this simply by engaging us with mystery. Because Jesus doesn't just give you the truth. It's shrouded in mystery a little bit. It's a little cryptic. And there's a reason for that. Because anybody can just, Jesus knew that many people would hear his teachings. And he understood that if everyone just all of a sudden heard the teachings and believed that he was the Messiah, they'd just follow him. And they'd follow him blindly. And they'd do whatever he said, because that's what people do when they have black and white certainty. And this is how atrocities have been committed in the name of religion throughout centuries and throughout history. Contrary to what you may think, Jesus does not want blind obedience. He wants heartfelt cooperation. He wants friends, the scriptures say. He wants co-laborers, as the scriptures say. He wants, as the book of Proverbs says, above all things, people who possess understanding. Ongoing students, which is the definition of disciples. God wants children who live from their hearts, not obedient robots. And so Jesus, not wanting the blind following that theologians try to make his teaching so black and white so that we can just follow it and get dogmatic about what we believe, and then we hold it over other people so that we can gain power over them, and we say that person with that way of life isn't God's will, so we must hold them at arm's distance and marginalize them, and that person engages like that, so I have to push them away, or that person sins that way. I don't sin that way. And my sin's forgiven anyway. I got grace. But no grace for you, That's what we do with black and white blind faith. Jesus doesn't want that. He wants us to live heartfully. Our faith should serve us and serve others. It should bring us together, not drive us apart because of what we believe or think or live or whatever. For centuries, Christianity has been completely misunderstood. But see, if you shroud something in mystery, you got to lean in a little bit. It kind of makes you go, what? What's that about? What are you talking about again? I don't get that. That's not what I was expecting to hear. And you lean in and you engage. Because that's what stories do. They pull us in. And how Jesus makes his stories and his parables a little cryptic. It's not exactly quite clear what he's doing. And in the scriptures it says basically just this. In Matthew chapter 13, in verse 10, Jesus says this. We'll put that up on the screen for you. He goes, the disciples came and asked him, why do you speak to everyone in parables? Jesus answered, well, to you it's been given to know the secrets. The actual Greek word there is translated mysteries. The mysteries of the kingdom of heaven. But to them it's not been given. For to those who have, more will be given. They'll have an abundance. But from those who have nothing, even what they have will be taken away. That's why I speak to them in parables. It's that in seeing they do not perceive, and in hearing they don't listen, nor do they understand. With them indeed is fulfilled the prophecy of Isaiah that says, you'll indeed listen but never understand. You'll indeed look but never perceive. For this people, their heart has grown dull and their ears hard of hearing. They've shut their eyes so that they might not look with their eyes and listen with their ears and understand with their hearts and turn and I heal them. But blessed are the eyes that see and the ears that hear. And he kind of goes on. What's that saying? That's all that are actually kind of colloquialisms. They're sayings that basically mean these people, there's people that will listen, and because I don't get what you're teaching, they'll just leave. But there's those that are like, there's something there. I don't know what it is, but it's kind of pulling me in, and I want to figure it out. And so you engage. And Jesus knew that kind of engagement will make you want it. And that's what this is all about. You got to want it. You got to work for it a little bit. You got to work for the meaning, because that's where investment in something comes. Christianity, like the scriptures, do we want to get into it? Do we want to really figure it out? Do we want to really live it out? Do we really want it? Or is it just, something that we do once a week, check off the box, we're good, That's what Jesus is trying to guard against. That's the kind of people he doesn't want on his team. He wants engagement. He wants you to want it. And so he's wanting you to lean in a little bit. He's inviting you to take another step forward. And that's what these parables do. That's what Sophia's doing in this story, is you make it come in. You make an invitation to lean forward. You don't get the whole story, and you lean in, and then when you least expect it, this truth will usually crack you over the side of the head. We've got to take control of our own stories, because this is inevitably what this is all about. When Sophia's talking to her friends, she's basically teaching them, she's engaging them, she's inviting them in. There's this point where the story kind of falls apart, and they're like, what? That didn't happen. And she's like, what? And then she'll lay down the real truth, and they're like, oh. She's taking them on this journey, letting them down, and then when they least expect it, hitting them with the real truth, because their walls are down and they can receive it, and then bang, they find themselves kind of surprised and shocked into a new story. And their journey is kind of set back on course again. You know, the most precious resource we have is our energy. And faulty storytelling is poor energy management. It's not engaging. It's not putting energy into the time we spend. And so we got to get our story straight in how we tell it to ourselves. And sometimes we need a hug and we need to talk it out. We need a listening ear. Sometimes we need the Son of God to tell us a parable. Sometimes we need a little old Sicilian lady to tell us a story that smacks us upside the head to shock us back into a new way of living. You know, I remember when I was in high school, I deeply, deeply wanted to be a musician. And I absolutely gave all of my time and energy. You know, I barely graduated high school, but I would get home every night and I would practice that guitar. I would figure it out. I wanted to learn. I was engaged. I couldn't focus on anything no matter how hard I tried, but you gave me a guitar magazine and had me read an article about extremely technical music theory, and I could assimilate it and remember it in about 3 minutes and apply it. It's just the power of engagement. And I remember my band director who kind of introduced me to my music college that I ended up going to. And after I had started going to that music college a few years later, I was over at his house one night, and his daughter was in the circle of friends that we hung around with. And I was at his house one night, and he asked, "How you doing?" You know, and I said, "Oh, great! I'm, top of my class at this music college." And he goes, "I knew you would be." I said, "Why? How'd you know that?" He said, "You were just so hungry to learn." He goes, "You really wanted it, and you were just so engaged." And I forgot about that until I was putting this message together this week. I kind of forgot that he'd said that. And see, that's the power of engagement. Engagement will pull you into a different story. And when we look into the scriptures, we got to allow Jesus and his stories. Sometimes they're there to comfort, but a lot of times they're there to disturb us and shock us. And that's the time when we become engaged and kind of pulled into a new story. And when Jesus invites us to basically picture it, to engage our imaginations, to engage our effort, and live into a new story. And that's what we can learn from Sophia Petrillo. So,
be thou my vision, O Lord of my heart, not be all else to me, save that thou art. Thou my best thought, by day or by night, waking or sleeping, thy presence my light. Be thou my wisdom, and thou my true word. I ever with thee, and thou with me, Lord. Thou and thou only, first in my heart. Great God of heaven, my treasure thou art. endless joys, oh bright heaven side. Heart of my own heart, whatever befall, still be my vision, O ruler of all. Still be my vision, O ruler of all.
Hey everyone, it's me, Chantill. I'm back to see you off. We hope you enjoyed your time with us today and that it was meaningful and life-giving. If you want to stay on top of things at Belgrade and know when we will be back, make sure to click the like button on Facebook or YouTube. And subscribe to our YouTube channel and be sure to hit the bell icon to get alerted when the next episode of Belgrade Online is available. Until next time, I'm Chantill. Thank you for watching and have a great week.